I'm Lou Bank.
And I'm Greg Benson.
And this is an ad for Ancestral Agave Syrup, the critically acclaimed award-winning syrup that helps gringo bartenders better make margaritas, Negronis,
Lou, hold up. Wait,
old
are you just...
fashions?
This is how you start your podcast.
What?
It's not an ad for Ancestral Agave Syrup.
Well, of course it is. I'm just cutting costs by not paying writers to make something new. I'm just using an old script.
You pay writers?
Is that some kind of jab?
No, I'm just saying that...
What are you saying?
Well, look, we've got this amazing syrup that's made in an ancestral manner, cooked down from the sap of the agave, harvested the way these families would to make pulque. It's a quality product. It deserves a quality presentation.
Yeah, okay, hang on. Ancestral Agave Syrup is made by real families following traditional methods. Unlike the industrial Blue Weber syrup you get everywhere else, Ancestral is cooked down from agua miel, harvested from Salmiana in Hidalgo, Mexico. It is the grade A Vermont maple to the sticky diner syrup you've been using for your cocktails. Ingredients matter, both in how your cocktail tastes and how you treat the earth. Ancestral is better for both. Is that good?
Sure. Or maybe confusing instead of cheesy. Look, just visit ancestralagave.com to learn more and to order your world-class agave syrup today.
And we'll call that a wrap. Catch you next ad, Greg.
Hasta pronto?
Ancestral Agave Syrup. Available online at ancestralagave.org and wherever Greg and Lou are able to coerce store owners into carrying it.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
So you don't charm the devil with your rock and roll load. Knows that country music's gonna save your soul. The devil finds his groove in them rhythm and blues that sound. It's gonna get you sun in the air.
Welcome back to the Speakeasy. I'm Sother Teague.
And I'm Greg Benson.
Greg, what is on your mind this week?
A lot of bad stuff, to be honest with you. And look, I know people don't come to this show for politics. They come here to hear about awesome people in the beverage industry. They hear us rap with our guests, and they're here for our A-plus guest segues that we just nail every single time. That's why people come to the Speakeasy. They don't come here to get bummed out about our current political landscape. But I also kind of feel like there are times where this landscape is so bad that doing the show and pretending that the bad isn't happening out there is kind of like doing line perfect Shakespeare as the theater's burning down. So I wanted a little bit to share with you guys my highly workable theory of something that I think would make this country, and specifically running for the office of president, a lot better. I felt this way for a long time. I'm officially launching this idea here on the Speakeasy. You heard it here first. My idea is this. I propose a constitutional amendment where after the vote, the winner of the popular vote, not the Electoral College, the popular vote is certified as the president-elect, someone, the Speaker of the House, whoever, comes to them and just goes, Mr. or Mrs. President, congratulations. Really great campaign. Looking forward to working with you. Before we do that, though, as you know, per the 28th Amendment, there's one last thing you have to do. And then they lead them into a room where there's a really gross clogged toilet that they have to get working, and they'll have 2 hours to do it, but they can't get any help on it. This is, I think, what we need from our presidents. And I'm not talking one of these little there's just a little bit of toilet paper in there. I'm talking a real motherfucker of a clogged toilet, the public one that's gone unserviced for so long that local children think it's haunted. All right. That's the kind of toilet that I'm talking about. One that someone was so ashamed of what they did that they just walked away and left it there and didn't tell anyone. And so it just sat for 2 days like the dead body of a guy that died alone in his apartment until a stranger comes by and is like, what's that smell? That's the kind of thing that this person is going to need to fix, because Sother, Armin, guest to be introduced in a second, because it's a metaphor, guys. But it's also an actual super gross toilet they need to fix before they can be president. All right. That is, I think, the best way to do our politics from now on. And frankly, I think it will work. I think this is a feasible, serious policy proposal, and I think our elected leaders need to take it seriously from now on.
I think you're going to have a hard time getting people to vote for this.
Why?
But I see,
Look,
but I see
Sother,
your intent.
you and I
Say,
know that like you work hard enough at being a bartender, you get promoted to manager, and then on day one, someone goes, "Congratulations!" They hand you a plunger, and they're like, "You're a plumber now." You know, it's like the more higher up you get in our industry, the more of that shit, metaphorically and literally, you have to deal with. And frankly, I think that's good for people's character.
I mean, listen, I don't disagree, and that's the exact tie back I was going to use for our industry, right? No job is not your job when you're on the job, and if that's the job that has to be done, it's the job that has to be done, right? I completely understand the metaphor, and I see it. I just don't think that we have the sort of moral character currently going on in our government to satisfy your goal.
I don't know. I think that this is something that the American people can all agree with. I don't want a president who doesn't know how to unclog a toilet. And first of all, like whether or not the current president still can is debatable. But like at one point, that guy knew how to like his way around plumbing. The other guy, look,
Sure.
I'm not convinced that Trump has ever even wiped his own butt in his life. Like, and if he does do it by himself, I'm sure he does it in some really fucked up, weird way that doesn't make ergonomic sense. Okay. So like he's disqualified right off the bat. So automatically you put this amendment in the Constitution, country gets better on day one. That's all I'm saying, Sother. All I'm saying.
All right.
Anyway, how was your week?
I'm waiting with my week was pretty good. I'm gearing up for Tales of the Cocktail next week. I go down for the entire week. I'm there Saturday through Saturday. Honestly, I'm looking forward once again to going from New York City to New Orleans for a break in the heat. Several years in the past now, it's been cooler in New Orleans during Tales of the Cocktail than it has been in New York, and I expect that's going to be the same this year because it has been a brutal heat wave.
Wow, it's like the climate is changing or something.
Or something. And then I would just point out that I'm doing several things while I'm down there, but one of the funnest things I'm going to be doing is with I'm working at the Sue's house again. It's going to be at 1133 Margaret Place. And on Tuesday, the 23rd, we're having a pool party. So anybody who wants to come to that, just RSVP Brett at Bonnet, BRETT at BONNETE.com. And come hang out with me by the pool. I'm going to be making cocktails using Sue's. We're going to have a live jazz band playing. It's going to be a real good time. So come break the heat in New Orleans by jumping in the pool with a cocktail made with Sue's and me.
Count me in, man. That's look, if for some unforeseen reason the country doesn't see the beautiful, perfect logic of my constitutional proposal, that will make me feel better. Like jumping in a pool with a Sue's cocktail does sound like it would be very refreshing.
It'll at least be soothing. Well, I tried. I leave that stuff to Damon.
I know. Yeah. Well, speaking of clever wordplay and our excellent habit of always introducing guests with smoothness and alacrity, I'm really, really excited to bring in Paul Nakayama here. He's here from Nankai, and he's representing Nikaido Shochu. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining us live from Los Angeles. It's great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It's great to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, finally getting off the ground. And listen, I think this is going to be one of those episodes. I know it's going to be one of those episodes for me where the learning curve is going to be pretty sharp. I don't think I know nearly as much as I even thought I knew about Shochu based on the information that you guys sent over and some light digging that I've done for the past couple of days just to investigate. I think I've mixed up categories numerous times in my mind and maybe even out loud to people. So I'm glad to have someone on to edify me and the audience about this category. How did you get involved in the first place?
Oh, yeah. Are we talking origin stories here?
We don't have to go all the way back to birth, but like what drew you to this category that is, frankly, I mean, I can only use my own view, I guess, but I think I can broaden it a little bit to the audience that I speak to a lot. Pretty fucking confusing to us.
Yeah, it is. And it's kind of our mission really to educate anyone who will listen about shochu and how special it is to not just Japanese culture, but I think beverage in general. So my story began roughly 11 or so years ago, or 10 years ago. when my wife and I went on our honeymoon to a tiny little island called Amami, which is her hometown, and it's like 200 kilometers southwest of the main island of Japan. It takes like a 12-hour boat ride to get there. So, I flew 10 hours to Japan and then another hour south and then a 12-hour boat ride to this collection of islands.
Was
And
it
what's
at least
really
like a
interesting
nice boat, or was it like what?
Was it
Describe this
scary?
boat for me. Was there beverage service? Like, was there room to walk around and stretch your legs? Did you like
Oh yeah.
get to do a little whale watching, or was it just like how ratchet was this experience?
Okay, so actually the first time was actually on this little tiny plane that I was sure I was gonna die on. It was basically like an episode of Lost. And I was like, never again. And so we asked for another way, and there was a sleeper boat, and it's essentially a boat you just there's a bunch of bunk beds, there's a dining area, a drinking area, and it's just a bunch of people like sleeping and drinking whatever for 12 hours to get to that island.
That
And
sounds
while
real
it's very
classy and fun. I mean, as long as
it,
someone doesn't get murdered and
Yeah.
it doesn't turn into like an Agatha Christie mystery, that sounds like a really nice time.
it could happen. I can tell you, there's a lot of places to hide bodies there. Um, but yeah, so when we got to this island, every island has a different ecosystem, but what connects this archipelago is 60,000 people across 8 islands, and there are 25 distilleries. So the people there really love to drink. And it was there on the honeymoon that we were in this tiny little bar after a day of caving that this guy approached us and gave us this giant bottle of what eventually became our own brand, Nankai Shochu. And it was just so easy to drink that my wife and I just finished the whole thing. And it was equivalent of drinking a bottle each, right? A 750 milliliter bottle each. And we got pretty drunk. We took some strange photos. And the next day, we found the guy's business card in her purse, and he was the chairman of this distillery. And he was like, "Hey, great meeting you guys. If you ever want to come by, please come visit the distillery." And so we did, and tried everything there. Absolutely fell in love. Bought 2 bottles, which was the maximum you're allowed to bring back. And I finished both of those bottles before we even got back on the plane. So on the way back to LA, I was like, man, I really want to drink that again, but I did not want to go through another 22-hour trip just for 2 bottles. And so that's kind of how it started. We started educating ourselves on alcohol licenses and importing. And the idea was we were going to just buy a shitload of shochu just for our own personal consumption. But one thing led to another, and we ended up finding distribution and getting some pretty cool bars and restaurants. And so at one point we had to make a decision of, do we make this a career or not? And because we want to support both shochu and the islands, we decided to do it full time and see what we can do with it. And that was 8 years ago that we launched the company.
Wow.
I mean, that's a pretty incredible entrepreneurial story, and oddly, it doesn't seem as unheard of as you might think in our field. People do really fall head over heels in love with the products, and then they devote their lives to it. So, 8 years you've been promoting soju, and again, sorry, I'm probably mispronouncing that, right? Shochu, and again, I don't think it's polarizing at all. I think it's generally speaking pretty easy to consume. When you get it in front of someone, they taste it and they enjoy it. I think it's just a little bit mind-numbingly confusing to the consumer. Am I wrong when I say that? So
No.
you didn't pick a polarizing spirit like absinthe or even gin for that matter. You picked something that's just, man, I don't know anything about it, and I can't seem to learn. So how do you approach that in the consumer, and even frankly, I assume in people who you want to just distribute to or have pick it up?
I think
I guess I'm asking the real softball question. Can you please explain this entire category to me?
you're sure
And to me.
elevator pitch. Let's start with the pronunciation. It's shochu, like show me the money and chew your food. Shochu.
Okay.
And it gets confusing because there is a Korean category called soju.
Right, which I think is what I just said accidentally.
Yeah. And both are not quite rolling off the tongue, so I get why it's so hard to pronounce. But yeah, so Japanese shochu has a very long history. It goes back about 500 years. It started around the same time as Scotch whiskey, and
Hmm.
it's a craft spirit mentality. Everything is single distilled. It uses koji, which is a Japanese spore that's used for basically everything in Japanese cuisine, from soy sauce to miso to sake. And it's kind of a miracle spore. Essentially allows like really, really efficient fermentation um, of your source grain. And then when you distill that, you hit 43% right off the bat. I don't know if you guys know this, but sake as a brewed alcohol actually has the highest ABV because of the efficiency of koji.
Wait, so how high can sake get in terms of voltage? Like what can Koji distill or ferment sake up to?
I think around 20ish. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I actually
Yeah,
did
you
not
can
know
get there.
that. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's get off topic. Stay on
Sorry.
shochu.
So,
Talking to
I
Greg.
think what makes shochu even more confusing, I think, is that it's often confused with sake and also Korean soju. And to some degree, just because we have such a hard time explaining what shochu is, a lot of people take a shortcut and call it Japanese vodka. Um,
Mm.
so I guess let me kind of just do some quick breakdowns. Um, Sake and shochu are kind of similar structure-wise if you look at beer and whiskey. So if you take barley and you malt it and you get and you brew it, you get beer. But if you take that same mash and you distill it, then you get whiskey. And that's kind of the same idea with shochu. If you get a rice mash made of koji and you brew it, you get sake. With shochu, the difference is that you can add any of around 100, 53 different agricultural ingredients um, to the mash, a secondary ingredient, which becomes the main ingredient by volume, and you distill that, then you get shochu. And the most popular ingredients for shochu are, barley, sweet potato, rice, um, even weirder things like sesame and cabbage and bell pepper and tomatoes. The only thing that's not allowed are fruits and sugar, with the exception of the shochu that I bring from Japan, which is made from black sugar. And the reason for that is Amami Islands, they have a special exception because of their historical connection to black sugar. Um, yeah, and so the other thing that makes it really cool is there are a lot of regulations and rules that govern shochu to make sure that it's artisanal and pure um, and worthy to drink. So it's always single distilled if it's a genuine shochu, um, in a pot still or some version. Always uses koji, and it can never have additives. So that's one thing you can never do is add color, flavor, anything. Once you do that, it's no longer classified as a shochu.
Well, I love that. But this is actually really interesting because I always assumed my criminal oversimplification when I would want to explain what shochu was to someone in like 8 seconds or less is I would basically do what you just did. I would do what beer is to whiskey, sake is to shochu. And yep. I always thought I was kind of doing people a disservice, but like these were conversations where I'm like, I don't have time to get into this right now. But is that actually like, it sounds like that's actually a fairly accurate way to describe this spirit.
It is, yeah. And I think, people that are in the industry, I think that's an easier way to wrap your head around it is to understand that relationship. There's a great educator, bartender, Don Lee, that uses that metaphor often, and it works great, I think, in understanding the basics of shochu.
So one other thing while we were talking a little bit about strength and ABV and stuff like that, and see Sother, there was a point I was incepting a seed. I was going to circle back to it. Mm-hmm. But one other thing that I think makes shochu both interesting and unique and cool, but also difficult for some people to wrap their heads around, is that for a spirit that's distilled, it's relatively low ABV. And I'd love to hear a little bit about both the history there and how that's received by consumers, particularly American consumers who always want the biggest, strongest, beefiest, most intense version of the thing.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And It really stems from a cultural aspect. Um, People in Japan enjoy shochu with food, primarily, and they also don't want to get drunk right away. They want the party to last all night long, and so low ABV has been a big part of the Japanese culture for as long as I can remember. Um, when we talk about Nikaido in a few minutes, that's really kind of where the revolution started. Is easy drinking, low ABV, versatile. Goes well with all the food. You can control your night a little bit better. Um, so when shochu is distilled, actually, there's a law that says it can't be any more than 45%. Beyond 45%, which is actually the limit for a single distillation anyway, um, it's no longer classified as a shochu. I've got a double distilled bourbon barrel aged sweet potato shochu that I'm launching next year. That's no longer a shochu because of that double distillation and the fact that it's 49%.
So,
But
so
yeah,
is there a name for the category that it jumps to at that point?
I'm still struggling with that. I think it might be a UDV because it's not a
Yeah.
vodka, it's not a whiskey, it's a thing. Yeah. But the
Sure.
reason why we take that 43 to 45%, cask strength shochu, and we dilute it down to 20 to 25% is really it's just easier to drink. You can enjoy it, more of it, with your friends and family, and it pairs with food better than drinking a cask strength shochu at the table.
Right. That was actually going to be my next question. Like how, and then we should definitely start talking about this particular soju. I've poured myself some. You probably heard it on the air there. How is this traditionally consumed? 24%. It doesn't seem like it's maybe going to make its way into a lot of cocktails as a primary ingredient. So I assume that it's drank either neat or on the rocks, or how?
Yeah, I mean, when I say versatile, I really do mean versatile. Uh, the category is pretty deep in that, with 53 different agricultural ingredients that you can make shochu from, there's a variety of ways of enjoying each version. So, for example, you might enjoy, the barley shochu on the rocks, mixed with water or mixed with soda water, a simple highball. With sweet potato, you might actually enjoy it with hot water as almost like as a hot toddy because you want to enjoy all the aromatics. With our black sugar shochu, we enjoyed it as a highball or on the rocks. But actually, what's funny is, when we started this company 8 years ago, meaning Nankai, not Nikaido, um, we really did focus a lot on cocktails because we felt that was the easiest way for us to introduce it to people without having to explain every single time what shochu was. And so we've had the the honor and privilege of working with some really great bartenders that created some low ABV cocktails that worked really well. Employees Only in LA had a fantastic dirty martini interpretation using our shochu. And then we've also had, our cask strength shochu being used as an alternative whiskey base, and so you'll have old fashions and sazeracs that are using cascade shochu instead.
So how is it? I mean, I love shochu, and when I had the possibility to have you on this show, I jumped on it because it's a category that I really enjoy drinking, but I don't know too much about. But we live in New York, you live in LA. I imagine this plays really well with like the coastal elites, to use for lack of a better word. How does it play in, to use our favorite punching bag here, and we are going to get a bartender from this city on at some point to defend it. How does this play in like Des Moines, Iowa? Like, do you have to do a lot of explaining of what it is and why it's not as strong as a whiskey or a gin and how to use it? Like, do you need to do a lot of convincing, or on the other hand, is that even a market that you're moving into? Are you kind of letting this spirit stand on its own merits and kind of do the explaining for you, and when people are ready for it, they're ready for it?
I think timing is kind of everything. When we first started 8 years ago, it was a pretty hard play, but I think when mezcal became so popular, it really opened people's minds to trying something new, and something different. I remember trying to introduce friends to shochu 15 years ago, And because shochu is single distilled, it can get pretty funky, right? It can have a lot of acquired taste type notes, and people weren't ready for it back then. But these days, I find that people are a lot more open minded about shochu and the different notes that it can carry. Um, in our case, with both Nankai and Nikaido, we use vacuum distillation, which is this technique that was originally used for gin and perfume, to essentially create shochu at a lower temperature, and it tends to create a more delicate,
Hmm.
floral and fruity shochu as opposed to a funky, agricultural smelling shochu. And that was also primarily used so that people in Japan, young adults and women, could enjoy shochu without having to smell like a drunk businessman. Uh, and I think that's kind of the way we're introducing shochu in America today is, a really clean, crisp, easy to drink spirit that happens to pair well with food and makes a great highball.
And as you mentioned before, makes your evening a little bit more. You use the word controllable, but a little bit more. It makes it last longer,
It does, yeah. I
right?
mean, it's about enjoying. For example, if you're a shochu lover like me, you want to have the opportunity to try more than one or two shochus a night. And so the idea is, if
Hmm.
you're playing with a lower ABV, you can try, 4 or 5 throughout the night and really get a wider range. And surprisingly, I think one of the going back to your comment about Iowa and talking to bartenders and stuff, especially where shochu may not be prevalent, is there is this idea that high ABV is necessary for cocktails, and I totally get that. You get more flavors and punch out of it, but we're really having fun experimenting with lower ABV cocktails using shochu as a base,
Hmm.
and finding some real
I mean, it's also
success.
it's very on trend right now as well to be low ABV, right?
It is, yeah. And I think what makes shochu a great candidate for low ABV cocktails is that inherently, because of the koji used to make the shochu, koji is just packed full of umami. That's why it's used for soy sauce and
Hmm.
miso. And so you've got these umami elements in shochu that are already going to elevate other flavors that you introduce into the cocktail. But also, you've got inherent salinity oftentimes from shochu as well because of the land it's grown on, or the ingredients that are from near the ocean.
Well, that sounds like a great segue into trying some myself. And first of all, I really love this bottle. I love the boldness of it because if you'll forgive me for this, when I unpacked it at first, I thought you had sent me a 40 as a joke because that's kind of what it looks like. Uh how is this received? I'm very curious. Like, I love all of it. I love the kind of the screw cap. I love the fact that it's, the label is really, really lovely, but it's making you question a lot of your priors before you even crack the cap on it. So talk to me about the thought process behind that and talk to me about how people are receiving this particular packaging here.
So what's really interesting about Nikaido is, the family has been making alcohol. They started off with sake and then switched to shochu. But they started since 1866, and um, around I think 1949 or so, they started making shochu instead. But the shochu that was made back then was really funky, really smelly. They were kind of known for that. And when Akira Nikaido, who was the sixth generation president, uh, starting from the 60s or so, he started playing around with barley and trying to find a way to make barley koji. Koji's 99% made from rice usually, and Nikaido and Oita Mugi Shochu was really the first ones to use barley koji as the base, and then combine that with vacuum distillation.
Hmm.
You just made this really nice, fruity and fragrant, easy to drink shochu that just blew people's minds, and it led to a revolution. In 1973, when this bottle was released, and while this version of the bottle that you guys are holding now is kind of rebranded for the U.S., all the elements are actually um, copying the Japanese version of the bottle, and we're just replacing the Chinese characters and Japanese characters with English. But this bottle, when it came out in 1973, completely changed the way people thought about shochu in Japan, and it led to a shochu boom. In the 70s and 80s, shochu became this huge thing where it started outselling sake 2-1.
Hmm.
And it was so popular that it actually indirectly led to another rule for shochu, which is you can't have shochu colored darker than the shade of Chardonnay. And that was because Margaret Thatcher, during the 80s, when making a trade deal with Japan, didn't want shochu, which was like really popular there, to compete with whiskey. And so she included this little thing about shochu saying, hey, you can sell shochu and export it into, into the UK, but it can't be darker than Chardonnay. And so it led to this new rule where even for cask aging shochu, you had to like find a way to keep the color light.
Wow. Thanks, Maggie Thatcher. Really, really got your finger on the pulse of what the people want there once again.
Yeah. But actually it's funny because I think that limitation, it led to a lot of ingenuity and creativity from the distillers and blenders. And it really led to some really fun products. Like we have a cask aged shochu blend called Nankai Gold that is, pretty light in color, but it's packed full of flavor because we're blending it with 5 different aged distillates, and one of them is a non-cask aged to bring the color down.
That's really cool. And I was also going to say, like, we had Jaime Salas from Proximo Spirits on a few weeks ago talking about Cristalino tequilas. So maybe there's a weird collaboration in the mix there.
Maybe there's an avenue you can go to age your product until it's as dark as you want, but then clarify it after the fact.
That's true. Yeah.
So you still get all those flavors from the wood, and still meet Margaret Thatcher's command, I guess. Well, let's get into it, man. I poured some. I think Greg poured some. I hope you have some in front of you. Let's give a taste.
Yeah, for sure.
And let's talk about what's going on here.
It's interesting because, like, the umami is very present, but there's no, like, usually when you see umami, it's in the presence of something salty, and there's no salty notes on this at all. So, like, that savoriness paired with almost kind of, light fruits, a kind of like floral note is not a way you usually see that flavor supported, right, which is really cool.
Yeah. There's some nice kind of vanilla and coconut there too, I think. And then, the idea is if you pair this with food, Japanese izakaya food, like pub food, which tends to be packed full of umami as well, they really do complement each other.
Sure. Like chicken skin skewers or things like that. Like
exactly. Yeah.
I'm getting sort of a almost apple, maybe even like caramel apple note on the nose. And then I do get some salinity, and there's something I can't put my finger on, and I have to assume that's going to be Koji, which I have like probably of all the things I've tasted over the years, that's my least repetitive thing, right? So like there's definitely a flavor here that I'm unfamiliar with it's very much pulling me to salivate, like I'm salivating a lot, right in the back. I don't know, it's unique, and I do understand that like that salivation makes me want to take a bite, right? It's time to have a bite of food, right?
Absolutely.
Like Greg's heard me say a million times, and I probably stole it from someone, but like when we talk about vodka, I say, well, food is the mixer for vodka, right? So maybe food is the mixer here, right?
It is, yeah. Which is why I love dirty martinis using shochu. My wife and I, we actually make our own pickleback juice using Japanese pickles, dashi based. So you're like just packing full of, it's just all umami. It's like an MSG bomb in your mouth, and so you drink, some shochu. You chase it with a pickleback, and it's just killer because it kind of highlights just how well it works with food. And then for me, I love enjoying highballs with it because then it brings out more of the other notes that the effervescence will unlock.
Yeah, well, I'd love to talk a little bit more about highballs and sort of how this is consumed in its native country, because I've never been to Japan, full disclosure. So I'm just going off of what I've read and heard, which is not the same as experiencing it firsthand. But I know I can definitely speak more confidently about the history of Japanese whiskey, which I know decently well, as opposed to the history of shochu, which one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this show is I didn't really know too much about it. But I do know that there is despite being less than 100 years old, Japanese whiskey is very much entrenched in modern Japanese culture. And I would sort of love to hear your take on the interplay between these two spirits, because again, Japanese whiskey was something that was essentially imported lock, stock, and barrel from Scotland and created based on that model, whereas shochu, like you said, has been around for half a millennium. So what is the relationship between these two spirits in Japan?
It's a good question. People do love their whiskey highballs in Japan for sure. If you go to any karaoke, bar, they're gonna have it on rotation for sure. That's just the power of a Suntory and Nikka. But
Yeah.
shochu highballs are so popular that there's a term for it called chuhai, and that comes from shochu highballs. So shochu highball is called chuhai. Japanese people love like
Shuhai.
cutting up words and putting them together like that.
I love that.
So if you hear
Yeah.
if you hear the word
Portmanteau.
chuhai, it's basically a shochu highball, and a million different interpretations of that. Maybe it's not even soda water, maybe it's juice, maybe it's tea, and they just call it a chuhai as a simple way of saying it's a shochu cocktail. But
Sure.
highballs are absolutely the most popular way to enjoy shochu, I think. Nikaido has their trademarked highball. It's called a nikaso. So that's Nikaido soda, nikaso.
I'm
And
loving
that
all
wasn't
these
even created.
portmanteaus.
I know, yeah, that wasn't even created by Nikaido. It was like the people in Oita where this is made were ordering that so often and calling it that it just became their official name for the drink. And that is basically a 2-to-1 highball with a squeeze of local citrus called sure, I'm blanking out right now. But basically similar to yuzu juice. And so you would have a squeeze of citrus in that highball, and it's just a perfect chaser for food and everything else.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I don't know if I know Damon's a big booster of this stuff, but have you gotten a chance to try the Pierre Ferrand dry curacao that they did with yuzu instead of oranges?
I actually have. Yeah, I actually have a
Yeah,
bottle of
that's
it somewhere here too, because we love to play with different ingredients for cocktails.
I was literally
that's
just
so
thinking how
delicious.
nicely the elements in this would go with those
Yeah.
kind of like, I mean, it's the old adage, right? If it grows together, it goes together. But and maybe that is kind of Sother, because you're right. There was a note on here I couldn't quite put my finger on, and I'm wondering if maybe it's kind of like a yuzu peel sort of a thing that I'm getting off of it. It's not like a juicy fruit; it's more kind of like a sharp like essence of fruit note that I'm getting off of this shochu.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on in here that I'm finding difficult to put my finger on, and I think it's because we're dealing with something that's technically one note, right? It's 100% barley using the barley Koji. But this is throwing off lots of flavors that flavors and aromas that from the distillation and everything else that are confusing my brain and my palate a little bit.
Now, I don't know.
I think.
Oh, sorry. I don't know the main chemical process of distillation, but I do know from seminars and classes that shochu does tend to unlock a lot of different amino acids, and so that translates into new flavors coming out of the barley. And so we don't typically think of barley being a fruity grain, but when you break it down with Koji,
or floral for that matter, but I'm getting both of those, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's something about Koji that breaks down the proteins and starches into really interesting ways.
Yeah, and then I imagine, of course, adding this to, as you've said, a highball, or even adding just some water, or even potentially maybe some hot water. The esters are going to be released, and we're going to get a whole new bouquet of flavor of aromatic qualities that are going to change the flavor again, right? Which
Absolutely,
makes it a little bit magic. Yeah, it makes it a little bit magical, like a little magic trick in the glass. I have to think that like the American consumer and certainly the American bartender being so sort of voraciously curious, and the trend being low ABV, that you're at a striking point right now, kind of like no other, right? If you could engage that same bartender who, maybe 10 to 15 years ago would have such an interest in something like mezcal, which you brought up as being such an artisanal, unique, and localized product, and combining that with the low ABV movement, I think that shochu is ready to strike. Yeah, would you agree with that?
That's our hope, and that's definitely Nikaido's hope as well. Nikaido had no plans to come to the U.S. for a very long time, and it wasn't until the 8th generation president Yuichi-san took over from his father, and he was the first one in the company to say, "Hey, I want to take this global and share shochu with the world." And his goal is really to make shochu, a mainstream category. And I feel like the time is right for now because of the popularity of low ABV and the open mindedness of drinkers out there. I think the hardest challenge though is similar to how we started the segment today. Is it's a very difficult category to summarize and wrap your mind around, and so it's going to take the concerted efforts of myself and Nikaido and all the other shochu companies out there, as well as folks like you guys and the bartenders out there to really kind of open up the possibilities. When I first started Nankai, we were hoping to do cocktails, but we were just doing simple chuhais, mixing ginger ale and yuzu into our shochu, or doing green tea and shochu. But then I met this really cool guy named Esteban de Luna, who's currently over at Tiki Tea in LA. And he was the first one to start mixing our shochu with Amaros, doing a 50-50 with Amaros. And it just blew my mind, you know. And then after that, I met this guy named Matthew Biancaniello, who does his tagline on Instagram is "Eat Your Drink," and that's because he tends to use a lot of culinary techniques in his cocktails, and so they're very like farm to table style cocktails that really capitalized on the umami factors of shochu. And so when we started like meeting all these different people and finding different possibilities, it really got us excited, and we wanted to share even more with people, And so our whole thing right now is, can we meet more chefs and bartenders and enthusiasts that are willing to take a chance with shochu and find some cool recipes.
Well, I mean, that sounds like a great opportunity. Also, Sother, I don't know if they sent you a second bottle, but they sent one to me. So I'm going to tell me a little bit about this, because this, I think, is going to lead into that, what you were just talking about. This is I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, so forgive me, the Oita Muji shochu you were telling me about. Is that what this is?
Oh, no. So actually, Oita Mugi Shochu, Oita is the prefecture where this is made. Mugi is Japanese for barley. So this is the Oita Prefecture Barley Shochu. And it's become its own kind of tagline because it's so specifically started in Oita. And Oita Mugi Shochu is always 100% barley, usually. The bottle that you're holding now is called Kitchum. And Kitchum is basically the same juice as the regular Nikaido, but aged for 1 year in a tank, and then bottled in this handmade, hand-painted clay cask.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and this Kitchum is so prized in Japan because if you ever watch a Japanese movie that's based in modern times, and there's a shochu in that scene, it'll probably be this bottle. It's just very iconic.
Wow.
And because it's all hand-painted, each one's very unique, and so it's kind of a like if you think of Suntory whiskey and Yamazaki and Hibiki, this is kind of like that thing where it's so hard to get your hands on it that when you do find it, you got to get it. It's just a beloved product in Japan, and so we're really lucky that Nikaido licensed this to us so that we can release it in the States, because it's just a fantastic product to share. And Sother, I apologize that we didn't get you one, so we'll send one over to you as well.
I love it. Thank you. The bottle is beautiful. But let's talk about it some. So it gets rested for a year in steel tanks. And what is the steel bringing to the party? And I assume that it's staying at the same ABV because it was the same juice to start with, right?
Yes.
So what does the rest of the steel tank do for us that resting in the bottle wouldn't do?
Like with most shochus, resting it allows it to kind of mature and soften. And so you lose some of the bite of the alcohol and get more of the softer notes to come forward. And so it's just a nice, really clean sipper. And you'll tend to get more of the vanilla notes, I think, out. This one tends to be enjoyed neat or on the rocks rather than a highball.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that people would equate like cost ratio, value ratio with drinking this one neat? It's basically, I see the kind of clocks in at almost double the price. I think often like the consumer says to themselves, well, this costs so much, I shouldn't ruin it by adding anything to it. Those air quotes for those just listening, but that I shouldn't sully it by adding stuff to it because I paid so much for it, which I think is ludicrous if you want to mix.
Absolutely.
But do you think that that's why this one is at least one of the reasons maybe that this one is more often enjoyed neat?
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason, in Japan, it's so hard to get a bottle of it that people tend to want to enjoy it on its own. But I think in the
Hmm.
US, when we're first launching this, we're going to have more than enough for everyone. And so if people want to play around and make a cocktail out of it, I think they totally should and take that opportunity. I think as time goes on and we start getting allocated, that's when the cocktails will probably stop and people will just go back to enjoying it on the back bar and just drinking it neat.
Hmm.
Yeah, well, there's definitely that sort of coconutty smoothness that we highlighted in the first one is really coming through on this one. There's a really nice, just not only I don't want to say creamy because it's going to give people the wrong impression, but there is a real just like mouth coating layer on there that's really, really just lovely and smooth. But there's also just something, it just feels tropical in a way. It feels a little bit more decadent. It feels a little bit more like you're on vacation when you're drinking it. It's a really fun version of the other one. It's like the first one is the one at work, and this is it like relaxing on a lawn chair under a cabana.
Oh, I love that, Greg. No, I think you hit it on the head. Mouthfeel is a really big thing for shochu. It's shochu's prized for its mouthfeel. You tend to get creamier, not creamy like milk, but just creamier notes just because of that mouthfeel. That it ends up being a nice way of extending the finish, and definitely it does make it better for food as well. So yeah, mouthfeel is definitely one of the high points of Oitamugi shochu.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Again, I'm glad that you brought up creaminess because I was trying desperately to find another word for it because again, I mean, that's gonna, our Patreon regulars can see this is an entirely clear spirit. There's absolutely nothing of Bailey's about this, and yet it does have that like really, really smooth sensation, which is kind of cool. I always like it when my eyes fool my palate about what's going to come. It creates an interesting moment where you kind of have to take a step back and be like, whoa, okay, what's going on here? Let's investigate this a little further.
Yeah, it's got that nice velvetiness to it, which is why I really like making martinis out of shochu. A nice 50-50 really highlights that mouthfeel. And so, yeah, it's something I definitely recommend you guys trying.
God, I love a 50-50
Well, I'm gonna
martini. I've been on the soapbox
I'm gonna take
before,
this
but
bottle into
since
work with me,
you
man.
opened the door for it, I'll
See
do
what
it
happens.
again. My ideal like summer sipper, 50, 25, 25 martini, 50% spirit, 25 dry, 25 white on a nice big cube in a rocks glass with a twist. Mwah. That
Oh
is
yeah,
getting me through this heat wave out here.
I love that. Yeah, I like to play around with different amaros and liqueurs also to see what we can come up with. But it's just fun because I think when you have an expressive alcohol like shochu, it's just fun to see what it plays with. And amaro tends to be a fun one because it brings out herbal notes that you don't normally get with shochu, and so I think you can get a wider breadth of flavors in there when you do a 50-50 with an amaro as well.
What from the Amaro family are you thinking about here? Because I could think, I mean, the nice thing, one of the things I really like about shochu is that it's very subtle and delicate, and I can think of a number of Amari off the top of my head, cough, cough, Fernet, that would just absolutely kick those subtle flavors to the curb. So like what are there specific Amari that you've tried this with that you really, really think work?
Yeah, Nonino works really well. Montenegro, even Shinar has some fun ways to play with it. If you make it into if you add some lemon or lime or citrus to balance some of those bitter notes. For sure, yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
could
know.
absolutely see this. I could actually I can absolutely see this 50-50 with some Montenegro over ice. I can even see it, not just because it's on my mind and I'm doing a lot of stuff with them right now, but like Suze would be like, it would both sort of like enhance some of the florality of the shochu, and it would sort of tame some of the bitter grassiness of Suze. Similarly with maybe Avez, which is kind of in the same category of Gentian. Could also see this going great with, in a martini style cocktail, but not necessarily with vermouth, with things like Bonal Gentian, or even going the other way with like beer quinquina, right? The sort of like, vin amaros, right? The wine-based bitter aperitifs and digestives. Cardamaro would probably be great with this.
Ooh, yeah.
There's lots.
Just don't go pairing it with Mountain Dew, Sother. That's a bridge too far. The internet, oh, really?
Oh,
Not with Nikaido, but with Nankai Shochu, which is the black sugar shochu that my wife and I import, our own brand. I like to mix it with cherry Coke and bitters and a splash of lemon, and it's just a
right.
really fun highball that now that you've introduced Mountain Dew into the mix, I might have to try that next.
I mean, I
Greg's
joked
taking the
because
piss out
I'm
of
pretty
me.
sure Mountain Dew is just bottled incel blood, but I could actually see some of the flavors from there working nicely with this. So maybe I should keep an open mind about that.
You never know. You never know. Happy accidents.
Exactly. Well, if people want to follow along with all of this mad scientist experimentation that we and you are going to be doing, Paul, where can they find you on the internet?
Right now, we are retail-wise, we're only available in, California and Nevada for now, but we've found some great internet stores that can also ship it to different places. So there's Umami Mart in Oakland that ships, and they've got a great catalog of shochu in general. We've got High Time, which is like a Disneyland style liquor store based in Orange County that ships everywhere as well. Yeah, there's quite a few places that they'll probably be able to ship to you guys, and so yeah, we hope people check it out and have a bottle shipped over to them.
Yeah, we'll list those in the show notes. High Time Wine Cellars and Umami Mart are good options to get it shipped. But I'm sorry, you said California and I missed it.
Oh, Nevada.
California,
You
Nevada.
also said
What an
Disneyland
interesting-
style liquor store, and I'm gonna need you to unpack that a little bit before we wrap up here.
Sorry, that was High Time that I was referring to. They're a family-owned liquor shop in Orange County that has pretty much anything you can look for, from a crazy wine cellar to a huge mezcal collection to a pretty large shochu collection, and pretty much every bartending ingredient that you'd want. Every form of bitters and liqueurs, and it's just so I call it Disneyland because once you go in there, you're lost for a couple hours.
Oh, I love places like that, man.
Well, yeah, it's fun. I
I
end up buying more than I sell, so it's not always a good thing for me.
It's a negative trade every time. Well, Paul, where do you have an Instagram or social media that folks can follow along and see your antics and your recipes and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my personal one is Nankai Shochu Official. Nikaido has Nikaido.shochu. It just launched, and they'll be sharing a bunch of different pieces of content. I'm particularly excited about their videos too, because I think they're going to show how shochu was made, some previews of Boelte, the area where it's made, which is a beautiful coastal region. And then, and also I think we'll be doing some, contests and giveaways too. So definitely keep an eye out for that. We'll have maybe some version of our Nikaido Dodger shirt as well.
Love it. I love that shirt. I saw it at the beginning of the show. And then will you be making your presence known at all next week down at Tales of the Cocktail in New Orleans?
We're going to be missing it this year, but definitely hoping for next year. I just got back from Bar Convent Brooklyn last month, and that was enough trade show for me for a little while. But I hope to see you guys in person soon.
Yeah, sorry I didn't run into you there. I was quite busy all throughout Bar Convent Brooklyn. Were you at the Emerging Brands stand, or where were you?
No, we were fortunate in that JSS, which is the Japanese Sake and Shochu Association, has an annual booth, and this year they focused on shochu, and so we partnered up with a bunch of other shochu makers and had this huge collection of shochu that you can just try right there on the spot. It was fantastic.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, we'll have to.
That's great.
Make it next time.
Yeah. I hope you guys made some good contacts there. It's a great event, and it was really well attended this year. So I hope you got some traction out of it.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It actually really opened my eyes. I think one of the things that I personally enjoy about getting into this business was how much it made me appreciate the category of alcohol and how much care goes into each company's products. I think when I was a casual drinker, it was so easy for me to dismiss any brand just because it was cheaper or it wasn't high end or whatever, and I would have sort of a closed mind about it. But now that I see how much work goes into any bottle, I like to keep an open mind about how every product is made, and so it definitely gave you a wider appreciation for the craft out there.
Amazing.
I mean, that's I love that actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what makes doing this podcast fun, is we get to have people like yourself on every
100%.
week who, open up our minds and occasionally even send us some fun samples. So really appreciate that. Really appreciate you sending us some bottles. Really appreciate you coming on the show and talking to us about Shochu, man. It's been a pleasure.
No, yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this with you guys and your listeners. Really do appreciate that. And if there are any other questions about Shochu in the future, please hit me up anytime.
I mean, I've got your info, so don't tempt me with a good time, man.
Yeah, you're gonna be our resident expert. Is there a toast when you raise a glass of shochu?
Yeah, so there are two ways of toasting. One is kanpai, which is basically cheers in Japanese. And then on the islands where we make our own shochu, we say hana hana, which in Japanese means flower flower. And that's basically, it's a flower for you and a flower for this moment. Let's drink.
All right, I love it. Well, I guess that's a great way to sign us out. Greg, you got who's coming up next week, and then we'll sign out with a little toast.
Well, next week you and I are doing a special live event from Tales of the Cocktail, Sother.
That's
so
right.
we will be live out in the field doing hard-hitting Edward R. Murrow style journalism from the mean streets of New Orleans during Tales of the Cocktail. So join us for that. And if you like today's show, you want to see more of what we do here behind the scenes, you want to get access to great things like video podcasts, bonus episodes, guest recipes, be sure to subscribe and become a regular on our Patreon. Big shout out to all of the people who are already our regulars. We really love you and appreciate you. And if you want more Speakeasy, there's always room for more. But for now, that's going to do it for us today. So forgive me if I do this wrong, Paul. Hana hana, did I get that right?
Hana hana and kanpai.
Hana hana.
Hana hana and kanpai, everyone.
Kanpai.
So you don't charm the devil with your
The Speakeasy is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food and drink radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.